Dust River, Texas, 1873. The wagon groaned down the red dirt road, its wheels wobbling as if they might surrender at any moment. Inside, two figures slumped, steeped in whiskey and resentment. Caleb and Loretta Hanley were arguing, their voices sharp enough to cut the wind. "You and these brats are nothing but dead weight," Caleb snarled, his words cracking with liquor and blame. "Dragging me straight into the mud every damn day." Loretta kept her back to him, pulling a frayed shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her voice was dry and distant when she spoke. "I'd rather die than keep feeding mouths that only open to wine." Stumbling in the dust behind them, 4 children followed like shadows left too long in the sun. The youngest, a girl of 3, ran forward on unsteady legs to grasp her mother's skirt. "Mama," she pleaded, her voice a tremble. "Take me." Loretta tore her arm away, as if she'd been touched by something foul. The child fell backward into the dirt. 19-year-old Eva stood silent, her hands gripping the small shoulders of her siblings. Her face held no shock, no tears, only the hollow resignation of someone abandoned so many times the wound had gone numb. The house behind them was already a gutted shell, its contents sold to cover gambling debts. Shutters swung loose from broken windows, and the porch sagged as if mourning its own decay. They were not new to being left, but this time felt final. A year ago, Eva could still feel the sting of her father's belt after he'd caught her giving half her dinner to her brother. She had knelt on the dirt floor, her cheeks swelling, lips cracked from the cold. Even then, she had looked up at Loretta and dared to ask, "If you never meant to love us, why did you bring us into the world?" Caleb hadn't waited for an answer. He'd backhanded Eva so hard she flew into the wall, coughing up blood and dust. "That was the mistake," he'd spat, his eyes rimmed red and wild. "Bringing a flock of useless mouths into this house." Loretta had stood in the corner, watching. She had not offered a hand, a word, not even a breath for her daughter. Now, as the wagon rumbled away, Eva did not cry. Her arms tightened around her siblings, pulling them close as the light bled from the sky. That night, beneath the collapsed awning of the porch, Eva scraped together what little wood she could find and coaxed a fire into a weak flicker. It hissed like a dying animal, more smoke than flame, but it was something. It was hers, her siblings huddled near, silenced by hunger and fear. She had no money, no food, no home, and no name she wished to carry. As the fire burned low, she looked up at the vast Texas sky, bruised purple with night, and spoke into the silence. "That name is not mine anymore." The words were just for the stars to hear. She did not cry when the baby whimpered in her arms, nor when her stomach twisted with hunger. Names meant belonging, and tonight, she belonged to no one. Only to the fire, the wind, and the 4 small hands gripping her sleeves in the dark. The next morning, a lone rider paused at the edge of the property. Calder Reed was not a man for town gossip. He worked his cattle, mended his fences, and kept to himself. But something in the desolate quiet had pulled on his reins. He saw them then, 5 figures huddled beneath a tattered porch. One girl stood taller than the rest, thin but unbroken, her arms wrapped protectively around the others. She watched him approach, her chin lifted, her eyes like cracked stone. He tipped his hat. "You all right?" She didn't answer. He tried again, his voice low. "You got a name?" She held his gaze. "I have a first name. I don't carry the rest of it anymore. Calder's brow furrowed. And what name is that? Just Eva. Something quiet flickered in his chest. Not pity, but recognition. He knew the look of someone who had been torn away from everything one too many times. Without another word, he nudged his horse and rode off, leaving nothing but hoof prints in the dust. That evening, Eva returned from foraging to find a bundle tucked beneath the broken gate, a loaf of bread, a flask of water, and cured meat wrapped in oilcloth. The next morning, a neat stack of chopped firewood rested where her weak fire had struggled. On the third day, a tin of beans appeared, then a blanket. At first, she thought it was a trap, but the food was good, and no one ever came to collect thanks. One evening she waited behind the ruined well as the sun bled over the prairie. She saw him then, the rider. He didn't approach, just left another bundle near the porch and turned to leave. She stepped out from the shadows. "Why are you doing this?" He glanced at her over his shoulder. "Because someone should." "That's not a reason." A faint smile touched his lips. "Maybe not, but it's enough." "I don't have a last name," she said, her voice hard. He nodded once. "And I didn't ask for one." Then he was gone. After that, she stopped hiding. She accepted the help but never grew greedy, always ensuring her siblings had more than she did. A silent trust began to grow between them, slow and steady, like the warmth of a fire that never demanded you feed it. For Eva, who had only ever been seen as a burden, that was more powerful than any rescue. The wind carried the scent of saddle oil and sun-scorched grass as Eva walked up the path to Calder's ranch. She clutched the parcel to her chest. Bread, salt, and 2 blankets, everything he had left. She knocked on the weathered gatepost. Calder looked up from mending a corral rail. "You came." "To return what's yours." She placed the bundle at his feet. "I'm not a charity case." Calder stared at it, then met her eyes. "Neither am I." He straightened up. "You want to return it? Fine. Work it off." Eva's fingers curled into fists. "Work? You know horses?" She shook her head. "Good," he said, tipping his hat back. "You'll learn." And just like that, a line was drawn. Eva stayed. She swept the porch and the barn. She watered the animals and picked stones from the fields with raw, shaking hands. She never asked for help, and he never offered it. But he noticed. He saw how she stood firm even when her knees wobbled. He saw how she fed her youngest brother before she ever touched a spoon. One morning, Calder left a broad-brimmed hat on the porch rail. A week later, a pair of second-hand boots appeared by the barn door. She never thanked him, and he never expected her to. One evening, after a long day, they sat near the fire. "You never asked my name," she said quietly. He looked up from the flames. "I know it's Eva. The rest of it." He stared into the fire. "You ever been shot?" he asked. Eva blinked. "No." "Hurts like hell," he said. "But it's the healing that truly burns. Sometimes the only way to get through is to stop looking at the wound. Just keep moving forward." He paused. "I figured asking your name was like touching a wound that was still bleeding. Anyone who survives what you did deserves to choose what they carry next." Her eyes shimmered in the firelight. No one had ever given her that. In the space he offered her, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Safe. Not because he promised it, but because he never asked her to be anything other than what she was. The rain came that night, heavy and sudden, battering the patched windows of the old house. The roof leaked, and the wind searched for every crack. Eva lay curled beside her siblings, a fever burning through her. She drifted in and out of consciousness, waking sometime in the deep of night to the smell of warm broth. A bowl sat on a crate beside her. A heavy wool blanket was tucked over her legs. Next to the bowl was a folded scrap of paper. With trembling fingers, she opened it. "You are not alone." That was all. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and sudden. She hadn't cried when her parents left, nor when she starved. But this quiet, undemanding kindness broke something open inside her. She sipped the broth, and it tasted like safety. The fever broke with the dawn. The storm had passed. She sat at the small table, the note beside her. Picking up the pencil he'd left, she pressed the tip to the back of the paper. Eva. She wrote it with care, as if meeting the name for the first time. Her pencil hovered over the blank space that followed. The space for a name that had only ever been used as a curse. She set the pencil down. For the first time, that empty space didn't feel like an absence. It felt like a choice. The days rolled on, quiet and steady. Eva and her siblings spent most afternoons at Calder's ranch. He never said they were welcome. He just left the barn doors open and a pot simmering on the stove. He taught them how to guide a horse without yanking the reins, how to listen to the wind, and how to judge a person not by the dust on their boots, but by how they treated something smaller than themselves. The youngest, Lily, adored him. She followed him like a shadow with braids. One afternoon, a wagon creaked up the path. A preacher from Dust River's tiny chapel climbed down. "I was told there were new children living out near the Reed place," he said, smiling kindly. "Thought it time to register them for school." He crouched before the children. "And what is your family name?" Eva opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The air grew thick and heavy. Before she could break, Lily stepped forward. She lifted her chin, her voice as clear as creek water. "We're Reeds." The preacher blinked. "Pardon?" Lily pointed a thumb at Calder. "He's our family now, so our name is Reed." The silence that followed was absolute. Eva couldn't breathe. Calder's eyes locked on Lily, his expression startled, as if something inside him had cracked and mended all at once. He turned and walked into the barn without a word. The flustered preacher mumbled something about checking back another time and left. Eva stood frozen long after the wagon disappeared. That night, when she went to the barn to return a blanket, she saw it. Carved into the heavy beam above the stable were two words: Eva Reed. No questions asked, just a name, offered like a gift. For the first time, when she whispered it aloud, it felt like it belonged to her. It happened on a Tuesday, beneath a sky heavy with hail. A wagon rolled up from the south, older than the town itself, pulled by a mule with ribs like broken fence posts. In the driver's seat sat a man with a slanted hat, yellowed teeth, and eyes as sharp as railroad nails. Beside him, a boy no older than 15 wore a smirk that curled like smoke. Eva was mending a cracked porch step, her knuckles raw against the splintered wood, when she saw it, a crude crest of 3 crossed antlers stitched into the man's coat. Her mother's kin. Blood, but barely. A cold dread stiffened her spine before her mind could catch up. The man swung down from his wagon as if he owned the very dirt beneath his cracked boots. His presence soured the air. "You must be Eva," he said, his voice slick as axle grease. "Loretta's girl. Heard what happened. A real shame. We figured we'd come fetch the little ones. Family ought to be with family." Before a word could form on Eva's lips, the barn door creaked open. Calder emerged, moving with the slow, inevitable creep of a storm cloud over flat land. His hat was pulled low, his work shirt damp with sweat. Wiping his hands on his jeans, he spoke, his voice a low and steady rumble. "They're not sacks of grain to be hauled away." The man offered a lazy shrug. "Didn't say they were. Just said they got our blood in 'em. Hanley blood. We've got a stretch of land, and we're in need of help. They'll earn their keep. Better than being a nobody out here." Eva's stomach churned. In the doorway, her youngest sister peeked out, clutching a rag doll, flanked by the wide-eyed, silent twins. Calder took a step forward. "You don't get to vanish for years and reappear when it suits your fence line. This isn't about blood. It's about who stayed when the rains came." The man's eyes narrowed to slits. "And who are you to say? You've got no papers, no marriage, no claim. Just a name you pulled out of the dirt. What gives you the right?" Calder's jaw tightened, and his voice dropped, hard as riverstone. "I'm the one who showed up." The air seemed to crackle with tension. For a moment, the man looked like he might reach inside his coat, but then a screen door creaked nearby. A neighbor stepped onto her porch, then another. Silent figures materialized under awnings at the edge of the general store. The baker's wife crossed her arms. "I saw that girl carry 3 children through a flood, and I saw this man bring firewood when no one else would." The blacksmith added his voice, deep and resonant. "They belong here. In this town, Boone isn't just a name. It's what we call the ones who stay." The man's face curled like scorched paper. "So you'd let her choose a stranger over her own kin?" Eva finally moved, her boots thudding on the porch steps. She didn't look at Calder, but her fingers found his calloused hand, lacing through his, tight as a vow. "I choose him," she said, her voice clear and sharp. "I choose the man who carried our future, instead of the one who cursed our past." A boy on the wagon spat into the dust. "You're just a child," the man hissed. Eva didn't flinch. "I was a child when you left me bleeding on the kitchen floor. I was a child when you slapped my own name out of my mouth. I'm not a child anymore, and I don't belong to you. I don't belong to pain." She turned, facing the assembled neighbors. "My name," she declared, "is Eva Boone. I chose it, with my hands and with my heart, and I don't regret it." A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the onlookers. The man stared, his venom spent, then spat near Calder's boot and hauled himself back onto the wagon. With a groan from the mule, the wheels turned, carrying them back into the dust from which they came. Eva did not cry. Calder did not speak. But that night, long after the wind had settled and the children were asleep, she found a folded slip of paper on her windowsill. The handwriting was rough, hesitant. Calder's. It said only, "Blood leaves, heart stays." That heart was what built the school. The barn had been a skeleton of splintered wood and shadows, a forgotten place for old feed and broken plows. But under Eva's vision and Calder's quiet strength, it was reborn. Together, they cleared it out, Calder heaving heavy crates while Eva swept away years of dust. She repurposed cracked chairs into benches. A warped table became her desk. She borrowed old slates from a widow in town and tacked frayed curtains across the drafty windows, turning the harsh sunlight soft and golden. One afternoon, Eva stood back, gazing at what they had made. It wasn't perfect, not even close, but it was the first thing she had ever helped build that was meant to shelter dreams, not just bones. On the old blackboard, the first lesson was a single word, etched in bold white chalk: name. She faced a room of children, not just her siblings, but others from the fringes of Dust River. Children who had never truly belonged anywhere, who were called by chores or numbers, or not called at all. One little girl flinched whenever Eva raised her voice, but with a patience carved from years of survival and a warmth shaped like a second chance, Eva taught them. She taught them to say their names with their shoulders back and their chins high, to spell them out like declarations of their own worth, to believe they mattered, simply because they existed. At the end of that first week, Calder hung a new sign above the barn doors. He had carved the words himself in blocky, uneven letters that caught the morning light in their grooves. Boone School, a place where everyone has a name. When Eva saw it, she reached up and traced the letters, as if they were a prayer. That night, the classroom was empty again, the lantern burning low. Calder stayed behind, pretending to mend a broken bench, but Eva knew he was just lingering. She sat at her desk, twisting a worn ribbon from her sister's dress between her fingers. He approached quietly and placed something on the wood in front of her. A folded paper, plain and official. She unfolded it, her hands trembling slightly, as if it might turn to dust. It was a marriage application. The line for the bride's name was empty, but at the bottom, in Calder's sharp, deliberate script, was a single sentence. Her name is her own to choose, but my heart has carried hers for a long time. Eva didn't speak. She looked up into his eyes that had never demanded a thing from her, that had seen past the sharp words she used as armor and the silences she wielded as a shield. Calder took a half step back. "You don't have to," he said, his voice gruff. "This place, it's yours, whether you sign that paper or not." Slowly, Eva stood, the application still in her hand. She walked to the chalkboard and erased the day's lessons. Then, with careful, deliberate strokes, she wrote 2 words: Eva Boone. She turned back to him, her voice as soft and steady as firelight. "I don't carry shame anymore. Just the name I chose, and the one you made room for." Calder came closer. He gently took the chalk from her hand, and beneath her name drew a single steady line. Not a period, not a flourish, just a line. "For the rest of our story," he murmured. Eva reached for his calloused hand, and together they stood in the quiet barn, 2 people who had been given little, but had learned to build everything from nothing. The air in Dust River that spring morning was sweeter than it had ever been, laced with wild lilac, campfire smoke, and the faint scent of cinnamon from a kitchen window. Neighbors came on foot, on horseback, and in creaky wagons, dressed in their Sunday best. They gathered not in a church, but on the open land beside a barn that was no longer broken. A simple pine arch, crowned with wildflowers, stood where cattle were once tied. Calder waited beneath it, his shirt clean, his sleeves rolled at the cuffs. His hands were steady. His eyes waited only for her. When Eva appeared, her youngest sister perched on her hip, a hush fell over the gathering. She wore no veil, only a simple dress sewn by 3 women from town, and a braid tied with her mother's ribbon, kept not for the woman, but for the memory of surviving her. Her eyes met Calder's, and she gave him a smile that wasn't wide, but was certain. The preacher began the usual words, but Calder raised a hand. "I don't need someone who shares my blood," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "I need someone who brings the fire home and helps me keep it burning." A few gasps rippled through the crowd, but no one laughed. In Dust River, everyone knew what it meant to keep a fire alive through the winter. Then Eva, still holding her sister, turned to face them all, neighbors, outcasts, her small schoolchildren. "A name is something you're born with," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But it can be poisoned, or stripped away, or forgotten. A place in this world, that's something you have to earn. Today, I am choosing mine. I carry the name Boone not because I was born to it, but because this man made space for me in it." She looked back at Calder, her siblings gathered at her side like wildflowers drawn to the sun. The preacher said nothing more. He simply stepped back. And the two of them, man and woman, heart and hope, sealed their vow not with a kiss for show, but with joined hands and quiet eyes that said everything. "We are already home." Later that evening, a new sign was nailed above the ranch door. "Eva Boone and family." Calder's handwriting, carved deep into cedar. Beneath it, a scattering of small, muddy fingerprints, yellow, blue, and red, where the children had pressed their hands in paint. A new kind of coat of arms, all heart, no blood. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth. Calder knelt before it, coaxing the flames. Behind him, the kitchen was filled with laughter as Eva and the children rolled out dough, flour dusting their hair. The youngest shrieked with delight when a scrap of dough landed in her lap, and Eva bent over, laughing as she wiped it away with the sleeve of her new dress. Calder looked over his shoulder, and the hard lines on his face softened. The years hadn't broken him. They had simply led him here. To this fire, this noise, this home. He left the poker leaning against the stone, knowing he was no longer the only one tending the light. Outside, the first stars began to pierce the deep twilight over Dust River. But inside the Boone house, the lights were already burning bright, and they wouldn't be going out. If this story found a place in your heart, if it reminded you that family is not always born, but is built, then you belong here with us. At Wild West Love Stories, we tell tales where names are earned, not given, where strength is quiet, and love is the loudest truth in the dust. If you believe in second chances, in ranchers with rough hands and tender hearts, and in women who choose their own names against all odds, then hit that subscribe button. Join our family of hearts, drawn together by warmth, not by blood. This was the story of Eva Boone. Out here, there are so many more waiting by the fire. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories and help us keep the light alive.